All right, welcome back to episode 4 now of your training, your introduction and training to interactive teaching. Um, and so, congratulations on making it this far. This means you're well on your way to being an expert teacher. Really, to the degree that you can implement the principles that we've already taught in the classroom, yeah, to the degree that you can implement in the classroom the principles that we have already gone over in just the first 3 videos, that will make you an outstanding teacher. And I think this video will just continue to enhance that. And we have more training to come because, as we've said, interactive teaching is a full, complete therapeutic process. Um, and not just a therapeutic process. It's a child development process. It's an interactive model that promotes all aspects of child development, and all aspects of childhood mental health, and and maybe not all aspects of childhood mental health. I guess I should take that back. There are aspects of childhood mental health that sometimes can be above the head of preschool teachers, and they need to come to therapy, maybe a therapist like myself, and sometimes it can even be more serious and they need a specialist of some kind. I have seen that, so not so I take that back. I don't know what's the word. What's the word when you take some retract? I retract that statement. I retract the statement. We're not going into every single aspect of childhood mental health, but we're going into many of the most prevalent aspects of child mental health, and we are trying to go through almost every aspect of child development, and that's all critical to childhood mental health, because if that child development does not occur, and does not occur in the correct order, or if it's delayed or behind, it can start to create mental health issues. But of course, we as preschool teachers, we can, if we do these things that we're talking about, we can very quickly get a child right back up to where they're expected to be developmentally, and now there's no mental health issues to worry about. And that's not to say that all mental health issues are a result of a lack of child development, or a delay in child development. That's certainly not the case. But improper child development is a strong predictor of childhood mental health issues. That's something that I think is important for you as preschool teachers to know and to understand, and to then know how to implement in the classroom these strategies to maximize development, growth, success, as we've tried to pound into you over and over again in the first 3 videos, right? Create success, create success, create success. I'm probably going to say that in every single video. So important to create success, right? And like we talked about in the last video, it's not just about catching them being good, it's about facilitating them being good, facilitating the success, and then of course lavishing praise and a social approval, social validation, as we talked about in the last video, on them, so that they will repeat that behavior, because that's what we talked about in the last video. Quick summary: positive reinforcement. What positive reinforcement does is it increases the likelihood of any particular behavior to occur again. When any behavior gets positively reinforced, it increases the likelihood that behavior will occur again. And the more often that a behavior is positively reinforced, so let's say a kid engages in a behavior 10 times and it gets positively reinforced once, the likelihood that behavior will continue to occur, not extremely high. But if a kid engages in a behavior 10 times and that behavior gets positively reinforced 8 out of those 10 times, maybe you didn't see every one of them, but and it's not about like just happening to notice. Again, like we talked about last video, it's not just about noticing that they did it well 8 out of 10 times. It's that you facilitated maybe 4 of those times. You helped to facilitate that success and that behavior that you wanted 4 times, and then they did it on their own another 4 times, and you noticed because you were paying attention, because you set the expectations, right? Again, we've talked about set expectations, set expectations, set expectations. If you do not set expectations, then the children don't know what it is that you expect. It's that simple. That's why we say set expectations. And like we've said in other settings, it's sometimes called pre-teaching, right? Like just let them know ahead of time. Like teach ahead of time what it is you want. We call it set expectations because it's your expectations. It's what you expect regarding their behavior, your expectations of their behavior. So I still feel it's the phrase setting expectations is more clear, and because then what happens is when they meet those expectations, now you have something to praise, and that's not always crystal clear when people use the phrase pre-teaching. So hence our way of describing it as setting expectations. So set expectations, set expectations, set expectations, and then as the children meet those expectations, and as you facilitate their ability to meet those expectations, that's when you praise them, give them a ton of social approval and social validation, and then you significantly increase the likelihood that positive behavior will reoccur. So that's the positive reinforcement that we discussed in episode 3, I believe it was. And so now here we are in episode 4, and we're going to pick up right where we left off. I think we got through positive reinforcement fairly well. We're going to go through briefly negative reinforcement, punishment, and consequences, and then hopefully, if we have time, and you know how long-winded I can get, but hopefully if we have time, get into a little bit of what you can actually do when a child begins to misbehave, because I think that fits right in with what we're going to be talking about today. So negative reinforcement. Now remember what I said yesterday, that anytime you hear the word reinforcement, it means that you are increasing the likelihood of a behavior reoccurring, right? So there can be positive reinforcement that increases the likelihood of a behavior reoccurring, and there can be negative reinforcement that increases the likelihood of a behavior reoccurring. Now then, with negative reinforcement, what you have to do is you have to understand the word negative within the scientific mindset and framework within which that term was initially developed way back, I believe, in the 1960s. possibly a little earlier than that, but I'm thinking the 1960s is when that term was coined. And so now, so I'm saying that because negative reinforcement is not reinforcement for a negative behavior. Because I think we discussed this yesterday. It's possible to get positive reinforcement for a negative or for a behavior that we don't want. Anything that feels good, anything that is positively rewarding and that meets a need and activates the reward pathway in the brain, that's positive reinforcement, and that can happen for negative behaviors. A child maybe running out of the classroom, and you start chasing them, and they think it's a game, and they're having a ton of fun. Meanwhile, of course, you don't want them to run out of the classroom. That to you, that's a negative behavior. That's a behavior that we don't want. But once you start chasing them, now it's a game to them, right? It's a game of catch me if you can, right? So that's an example of a behavior that we would not want. We would want to put a stop to that behavior, but that behavior could be getting positively reinforced to that child because they're having fun. So that's a positive reinforcement. So what is a negative reinforcer then? Okay, again, it's not a reinforcer for a negative behavior because we just described what we would consider a negative behavior that's being positively reinforced. So negative reinforcement. Okay, so again, real quick definition, scientific definition of positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is when there is a positive stimuli that follows a behavior. So a positive stimuli following a behavior, thus increasing the odds of that behavior occurring again. Negative reinforcement is actually when you have some sort of negative stimuli that's already occurring, something unpleasant is already occurring within the individual, and whenever that unpleasantness is removed, that's negative reinforcement. So that may not make sense right off the bat, but I have a few examples here for you. There's a few different examples that I tend to use. Okay, so one really easy one is I get migraines. Really like individually, like this is not just an example. I literally do. It's an example, but also reality. I actually do get migraines. I get migraines, so I get, and I think they're not maybe classic migraines, more like tension headaches, cluster headaches, things like that. So difficult to diagnose. But anyway, the point is, so I get headaches. Let's say that I have a bottle of Advil right here. So I get a headache and I take some Advil. And in the process of taking Advil, my headache goes away. So obviously that headache was unpleasant for me. I take Advil, the headache goes away. That is the removal of a negative or unpleasant stimulus. So negative reinforcer, right? So we're going to call it, instead of an unpleasant stimulus now, you've heard that, so that's a good way to bridge the gap so you understand what it is we're talking about. But in order to understand negative reinforcement, we're going to use that word now, okay? Negative, right? So it's an unpleasant or negative for me, right? A headache, not a positive. It's a negative for me when I have a headache. And then I take some Advil, yeah, just regular old Advil, and I take some of that. It takes the headache away, so it removes the negative stimulus. That is the very definition of a negative reinforcer, right? I was just reinforced for taking Advil, okay? Not because it created something remarkably positive for me. It's not like I love taking Advil. I'm not out. It's not like a drug of abuse, right? I'm not like out like I'm not an Advil junkie, like out seeking Advil all the time, trying to get my hands on all the Advil I possibly can, because I just love it so much. No, hopefully most of the time I'm okay, and like right now I don't have a headache, and so I have no need of Advil. Like I just have no desire for Advil. Because on its own, Advil is not a positive reinforcer. It doesn't give me any positive. Advil has never given me any positive reinforcement. What Advil has done is it has provided me with negative reinforcement because it removes the negative stimuli of my headache. Okay? So hopefully that makes a little sense. Couple other examples, because I think negative reinforcement can be difficult to understand, but we will discuss how it affects kids in the classroom and why you do actually need to know it. This is not just for behavioral science professionals. Although as a childhood caregiver, you kind of need to be a little bit of a behavioral science professional, and that's why we go through this. So another example, I was looking for like a little pin, like a bobby pin or something like that. Best I could find was this little screwdriver. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, or not a screwdriver, a screw. So there's this little screw here, right? Now this little screw, if I poke it into my finger, right, like this, and I'm poking it, ow, that doesn't feel great, you know, and I'm doing it to myself, ow, that actually does. I did it a little hard. That hurt. But here's the thing. So it caused pain, but I took it away. I stopped doing it, right? So as soon as it was causing a little bit too much pain, you know, and I was like, ow, that hurts, you know, I removed it, you know, shook my hand a little bit. That's a negative reinforcer. It's my way of eliminating a negative stimuli. Okay. And honestly, and we learn to avoid things that cause pain. Okay. I don't go around sticking screws into my finger because I know that causes pain, because I've learned that lesson. I don't know, you know, I don't know when I learned that lesson, because I in my mind it feels like I've known it forever. I'm sure I learned it as a kid. I'm sure we all know not to stick our hand on a hot stove, right? Because we know we're going to get burnt. And I don't know whether you learned that if you're an adult. Like, I don't know if you remember learning that by experience, or whether, you know, you had a sibling who learned it by experience, or maybe just your parents taught you and you understood because you understand what like burning is. a little bit. You understand hot and oh, super hot, that burns, that hurts. And and so that's another form of negative reinforcement that is learning that we all experience. We all know that. And so not putting our hand on a hot stove is a behavior that none of us do, right? Um, because because we understand that that, that's not going to help us. Um, now let's talk about, so we've talked about behaviors that maybe so the screw or the hot stove, uh, those could also be, now there's a reinforcer for taking the hand off or for taking the screw off. um, but the actual act of of causing the pain itself, that would be, um, from a behavioral standpoint, that would be termed a punishment. You were, again, not not a punishment inflicted by a person, but just you were naturally punished, through the act of putting your hand on a hot stove or sticking a screw into your finger. Don't do those things. It's the act of taking it away that reinforces that behavior, the behavior of the removal, right? Um, the headache example, that is definitely, so that's a behavior. Me taking Advil is a behavior that can occur again and again and again. I've been negatively reinforced for taking Advil multiple times, and so when I get a headache, if it's a small headache, first thing I think of is Advil. I've been negatively reinforced for that many times. Now think of, let's imagine a less healthy version of negative reinforcement. I've I've got a cherry Pepsi here. I'm gonna take a sip of it because my mouth is dry. Um, but imagine this cherry Pepsi was beer or alcohol, um, maybe even maybe some kind of hard alcohol even. And and if I was going through a very difficult time emotionally, that alcohol would blunt my emotions and and allow me to sort of escape the emotional pain that I was in. So, and we talked about this, I think, in the second video when we discussed human needs, and one of those needs is the need to avoid pain, and that it's the we gave examples of physical pain here with the screwdriver or the hot stove, although I don't have an actual hot stove here next to me to give that to give a visual of that. I did have a screw here. So in those senses, um, that was physical pain that we were removing. Now, but what about, we talked about emotional pain. People have an even greater desire to remove emotional pain from their lives, and from what it is that they're experiencing. And sometimes people will even inflict physical pain in order to resolve their emotional pain. People will do lots of unhealthy things to try to resolve emotional pain. It may involve inflicting physical pain on themselves intentionally. It may involve drinking alcohol to blunt their emotions so that they don't have to feel that pain. Now then, if that's something that happens repeatedly, right, that they're in a lot of pain, emotional pain, over and over and over again, and that their go-to for that is drinking alcohol, because it blunts my emotion, so it takes away that emotional pain. That is, again, the emotional pain is a negative stimuli. They are finding a way to get rid of that emotional pain, and so they have now been negatively reinforced, right? So that it's a reinforcer. It increases the odds of that behavior occurring again. Now, with alcohol, there's something else, though, in that alcohol can also make someone feel good, at least so I've heard. I don't drink myself, but alcohol can be a positive reinforcer as well as a negative reinforcer, right? It can take away the emotional pain, and then it can also produce positive effects, and that's why, alcoholics. We talked about this a little bit also in the video of needs. Alcoholics don't just become alcoholics because they're always in emotional pain. Alcoholics can become alcoholics because they're looking for something that makes them feel good, physically. Maybe they just go to parties and they like to feel good at parties, and it makes them, and alcohol has different effects on different people. For some people, they drink it and it tastes gross and they throw up or whatever, and it's like, I'm never doing that again. And for other people, it's just like, it's this euphoria. Well, that's a positive reinforcer, and so that's why alcohol is so addictive. It can act as a positive reinforcer and a negative reinforcer. And now, of course, hangovers, vomiting, those things, those would be punishments. Punishments is anything that doesn't feel good, that is specifically induced by whatever behavior you're engaging in. So punishment, of course, can come from a person, but it can also be an exterior, scientifically be an exogenous punishment, as opposed to an endogenous. I think I got that right. Punishment. Well, no, because a punishment inflicted by another individual would also be exogenous. It's coming from without. It's just the difference of whether or not it's coming from a person or whether or not it's coming from something else within the environment. And that actually does make a big difference, of course, in terms of relationships. Real quick, though, before we talk about punishment, so now that you have kind of an idea of what negative reinforcement is, and I think I spent too long trying to explain it to you, but it is a little bit of a difficult concept to wrap your minds around because it gets misunderstood all the time. In fact, I had professors in school who explained it completely wrong. They were like, "Oh, positive." This was a clinical psychologist that I had, and I was an undergrad, so I hadn't even received my bachelor's degree yet. But I'd read my dad's book. I knew what positive and negative reinforcers were, and he was like, "Oh, and he was a good teacher, taught lots of really good things, but when he got to positive and negative reinforcement, he didn't understand what they were. He was like, oh, positive reinforcement, so let's say you do something good and I give you a cookie. That's positive reinforcement." He was correct on that. He said, now then, let's say you annoy me or you do something bad and I take that cookie away. That's a negative reinforcement. No, it's not. That would be a punishment, okay? That would be deemed a punishment, a punisher, not a negative reinforcer, because it did not increase the odds of that particular behavior reoccurring. It was not a reinforcer. Taking the cookie away is not a reinforcer. Okay, it's a punishment. and there obviously clearly there's no negative stimuli, unless the only way that taking that cookie away could be a negative reinforcer is he gives the person a cookie and they think, oh great, a cookie, I got a cookie, and then they take a bite and it's a salt filled cookie instead of a sugar filled cookie, and they're like, ew, this is so gross. And so he takes it away from them and maybe gives them some water to wash it down, you know. And so there could be a little bit of negative reinforcement in that. But that's a whole different scenario. That's not what he was talking about. He was wrong. He didn't understand what negative reinforcers were. That's okay. Most people don't. But here's why you need to know it. Remember the example of the example of the alcohol is especially important, right? Trying to escape some sort of negative emotion. You know, the example of the Advil is good too, of trying to escape. That's my way of trying to escape pain, obviously, right? And the example of alcohol, a way of someone trying to escape emotional pain. Now, I want you to consider how often do children try to escape some sort of negative emotion during any random school day. Let's say that they really, really hate sitting in class and doing the curriculum work. Maybe they feel like a failure. Maybe they don't feel like they're doing it well. And of course, that's your responsibility to create success during that so that they don't feel like a failure. But maybe initially, as you're working on that they still feel that way. And that can be a hard cycle to break, even if you're working on it really well. It can be a difficult cycle to break within their own minds. And so just sitting down to do schoolwork is a negative stimuli for them, and they get up and they run away. But maybe they don't run away in a way that makes you chase them. Maybe they simply go off to the other side of the classroom, and they're just playing quietly with blocks. And sometimes we might encourage ignoring a behavior that is not in any way interfering with the rest of the class. They're not doing anything dangerous. They're not hurting anybody. And so we don't want to inflict a punishment in that case. But in this instance, you need to be aware that they are trying to escape a situation that is causing emotional pain. So first of all, that's the first thing you need to recognize, is they are engaging in escape behavior. Anytime you see escape behavior, that means that there is a negative stimuli, something unpleasant that is going on with them at that moment. And so you need to be aware of that. And then you need to be aware of what behavior follows. And if the behavior that follows it is successful at helping them to actually get away from that pain, then they've been negatively reinforced. So now back to the question, like, what would you do? What do you do if a child doesn't like sitting there at the table during academic curriculum time because it's unpleasant for them? It's creating a negative stimulus, and they want to escape. And if you let them escape, it automatically creates a negative reinforcer. It's not anything that you've done. It's just the fact that they were able to successfully escape. the unpleasant stimuli, and that becomes a negative reinforcer. It took away whatever unpleasantness, whatever emotional discomfort they were feeling during curriculum. Just like Advil takes away my headaches, just like alcohol may take away some people's emotional pain. But it's not healthy, right? We don't want people to get in. We don't want kids to get in the habit of just leaving whenever they want. So one thing you could do, there's different things you could try. This is just an example, but one thing you could try is, and this works especially if you have two teachers in the classroom, but even if you have one teacher, if you have one teacher who can continue to guide the rest of the class verbally, continue to give them praises for the work that they're doing, or maybe you're even giving instruction, and to the degree that you can give instruction as you slowly walk over to the kid who walked away, right? And that's a skill. That's a skill that you have to learn. That's why we talk about interactive teaching is not just about this knowledge. It's about developing these skills. So a single teacher, and we actually have a teacher at A Child's World right now who would be perfectly capable of doing this. She could be at the board. She could be at the actual whiteboard teaching something on the whiteboard, and a kid gets out of their seat. She notices that. The first time, she may not know, is this kid trying to escape something? I don't know. If it happens a second time or third time, then she definitely knows. This kid is trying to escape this setting. And so I have to deal with it, because otherwise it's getting negatively reinforced. It's going to continue to happen, and this kid's never going to become successful at being able to sit down and learn during curriculum. So she could be teaching at the board. She could put down her marker but continue to teach. She could continue to teach without. You can continue to teach without a whiteboard, right? Or so she could either continue to teach, or she could say, hey, you know what? I want all of you guys to practice this thing that I just explained to you. I want you to practice it on your sheet of paper. Maybe they're not ready to do the worksheet yet because she still has more teaching to do. So maybe she says, turn your paper over and practice doing this. There's all kinds of creative things you could do. Or maybe, hey, I want each of you guys to quietly whisper to your partner what you understand in terms of what I've taught so far. And then when I come back to the front of the classroom, you guys can maybe share what you've learned so far. There's lots of different ways. Or maybe they are ready to begin working on the worksheet. Maybe just the beginning of the worksheet, because she's not fully done with her lesson. But they can write their names. They can get started. They can get started on their worksheets. As she slowly walks over to the child who has gone away, she gently takes their hand and says, hey, would you be willing to come with me for a second? Come on. So she takes their hand and she walks with them, and maybe she holds their hand for a little bit as she's continuing to give some instruction to the classroom, and always be praising the other students, right? Always be praising every single on-task behavior that she sees from students. And then as this child begins to feel safe, just holding her hand, because that now the child no longer feels those unpleasant feelings of sitting there and feeling like they don't know what they're doing. And then maybe she gets down and whispers, once she knows that the child is feeling comfortable, is no longer feeling that dis-ease, right? That's again, that's why we it's where we get the word disease from, right? It's dis-ease. And that child was feeling a bit of dis-ease during academic curriculum time. And so they escaped. And if the teacher doesn't do anything about it, it will be negatively reinforced, thus making it more likely that that behavior occurs again. So she goes over, and then as she can, takes the child's hand, and because she's developed a relationship with the child, right? This is all based upon her having previously developed a relationship with the child, a relationship of trust. The child trusts her and is perfectly happy to take her hand and follow her around as she walks around. And then at some point, she may kneel down and whisper into the child's ear and say, I know that you're a little bit uncomfortable with the work that we're doing, but do you think you could just sit in your seat and you don't have to do the worksheet right now. Just sit in your seat. Just sit in your seat quietly as I'm doing my lesson, and if you don't understand everything I'm talking about, that's okay. And you don't, when it comes to the worksheet, you don't have to do that today. Maybe some other day, but not today. Or if the teacher does want the child to do the worksheet that day, she'll be like, I'll come and I'll help you. I'll help you with that worksheet, and we'll do it together. And I promise that it'll be fine. But you can get a child to come back and sit in their seat without even doing any work, and you can do that for a few days. They may not be learning all the academic skills, but at least they're learning to sit still and not escape from this type of situation. Because as long as they're escaping and they're being reinforced for that, well, now there's no chance of them ever learning, right? Like, zero chance of them learning anything. So even if you can just get them to sit in their seat quietly, you've now increased the odds that they can begin to learn something, even if you're not asking them to do work right away. Of course, that's our ultimate goal. Of course, obviously, we want them to learn to do work and to learn to be successful. We're going to try and create success in that, right? Create success. We're going to do everything we possibly can to do that, to make that happen. But the first step of that, again, it has to be, creating success is a step-by-step process. It doesn't happen all at once. So it may simply be the success of sitting there with the other kids at the table as during the learning process, during the academic curriculum time. That's the first step of success. That is a whole lot better than the child escaping off and doing something else and letting them get away with that. So you can see that the teacher has not given the child any punishment. They've not given the child any consequences. All they've done is help them. They've used the relationship of trust that they've built to help them come back and be able to sit still, sit quietly, and during academic time, and that's the first step to them now hopefully being able to learn and engage in the academic work, and the teacher may have to help them with that in order for them to be successful. Um, but that's the first step. And again, I've already told you some of the other steps of the teacher actually doing the work with them, um, doing all kinds of things to help them to be successful, because the teacher has recognized that they are engaging in escape behavior. So escape behavior, that's something that's a term that is easy to remember, escape behavior. And anytime you recognize a child engaging in escape behavior, you know that it's because there's some sort of unpleasant, negative stimuli that is happening within them, likely emotionally, and they're trying to escape from it. And if that escape works, then that behavior is being negatively reinforced, right? So it's again, I know the term negatively, it might throw people off, but the point is the behavior is being reinforced because they're being allowed, or if, as long as the escape actually works, if their attempt to escape works, then that behavior has been reinforced. So we need to be aware of that. And now again, our first instinct should not be to punish. Our first instinct should not be to give consequences. We're like, well, we don't want them to continue to engage in this escape behavior, because that's not helpful for the child's development. That's not helpful for our relationship with them, for their trust in us as teachers. It's not helpful for for a lot of different reasons. But we need to notice it. We need to be aware of it. Sometimes they can even escape little tiny things that aren't even a big deal, but you can be aware of it, and it's like, okay, that, or maybe they're trying to escape engaging in peer interaction by playing alone during individual center time, or maybe out on the playground they're playing alone. Maybe they're playing perfectly well and appropriately, going down the slides, playing on the equipment. Maybe they're playing appropriately, but they're purposely trying to avoid any type of peer engagement, because maybe that creates a sense of unpleasantness, of dis-ease, right? Some sort of negative stimuli, difficult emotions, and they're trying to escape that. And as a teacher, you can pick up on that. Now, that's not an immediate, like, bad behavior, obviously. And not that we almost want to avoid labeling any behavior as bad, because all behavior is just an attempt to meet a need. So in a sense, there's no such thing as bad behavior. There's just behavior that is not helpful, that's not healthy in terms of the growth and development for these children and what we want for these children. And but so yeah, there can be behavior that is clearly, like, obviously not healthy and not helpful, and maybe even obviously and clearly, like, hurtful in some way in terms of escape behavior, and we need to address it right away, like the instance of a kid leaving the academic setting. Almost anytime a kid runs out of a room, it's probably some sort of escape behavior, unless they really just want that game of chase, catch me if you can, that I described earlier. That's a possibility as well. So there's lots of different possibilities of children trying to engage in escape behavior, it's very important that you be aware of that. The better relationship that you have with every single child, and the more that you're aware of all the behavior of all the children, which will happen through setting expectations, because there's this interesting thing that happens is the better you get at setting expectations, then the more you're going to be aware of how well the children are doing at meeting those expectations. And as the children then are meeting those expectations, then you're dishing out praise and positive social reinforcers for them meeting your expectations, so that they'll continue to do that. And so as that happens, there's this slow process, this gradual process of where you as a teacher, you become far more aware of every single behavior, maybe not every single, but you become far more aware of all the behavior that is going on around you, of what every kid is doing. And you become more aware than you've ever been before regarding every child and what it is they're doing, and suddenly you begin to recognize some kind of escape behavior that a child is engaging in, and now you understand, right? Because now you've listened to this video, you know what escape behavior is, and you don't want that behavior to be reinforced. And so you find a way to help that behavior to not be reinforced, like I discussed with the teacher, maybe bringing the child back to just sit in their seat during academic time, or a kid not wanting to play with another kid. And it's not something that you have to, obviously you're not going to give a punishment for that, but you may notice that, and you're like, okay, well, this child wants to play alone, and it's because they're experiencing some sort of difficult feelings, unpleasant emotions that they're trying to escape by playing alone, and I want to facilitate them being able to play with another peer. And if you have developed a relationship of trust with that child, then, and they trust you, you can start playing with them and then invite another child over. Or you can start playing with another child and then invite the other child over. Or I mean, there's so many different possibilities of what you could do based upon your knowledge of these kids and what you think is the best way to approach that. And that's why we say that within interactive teaching, we're not giving you a precise step-by-step manual of how to do everything. We're giving you general principles, but these general principles are absolutely essential for you to understand in order to create success for every child. So we've gone over 50 minutes again. Again, congratulations on your continued attention and learning. If you've made it this far, you hopefully you've learned a lot, and hopefully you have a much better idea of what you're looking for in kids and how to go about working with all sorts of different behaviors. And again, just thank you for your attention. Thank you for learning. Thank you for your work, and thank you for trying, I'm assuming, to implement what we're discussing into your work with kids. I think we spent this entire video talking about negative reinforcement, when I said, I think at the beginning, I gave a list of things I was hoping to discuss. Obviously, I didn't get to all of those because I spent the whole time on negative reinforcement, but I hope, and escape behavior, right? That's what we're really looking for in a preschool setting, in any school setting with any kids, we're looking for escape behavior, and to the extent that we can limit that and help provide healthy and positive alternatives that increase child development, then we're doing good. We're on the right track. So that's your lesson for today. Is escape behavior. Notice it. Try not to let it become reinforced, and then work on the child, to help them make it through that dis-ease or those unpleasant emotions in positive, healthy, and productive ways. And as you do that, you'll be helping children in the exact way that we want you to. And it'll be remarkable, some of the growth that you'll see in children, because children are always actually engaging in some form of escape behavior. In fact, all of us are, because there's situations that all of us are uncomfortable in, and maybe we're trying to escape from them in ways that we may not even realize. And to the extent that we get away with it, it's that behavior is being reinforced for all of us. But to the degree that you can recognize that in kids and help them with that, that's just amazing. It's going to increase, and as you deal with it, as you recognize it and deal with it and help them find positive alternatives, you will increase their confidence. You will increase their sense of self-worth in remarkable ways, and they will feel now like they can be in all these different situations, and they will feel like they can be successful in all these different situations. And imagine what that does to a kid and his or her ability for future success. So I know I spent the whole time talking about this concept of negative reinforcement that maybe you've heard of before but never understood, but now you understand it, and now you understand that the way it gets carried out in terms of actual human behavior, all human behavior, but and especially child behavior, is really important to understand, and that to the degree that you can address it and turn it into a positive so that they're no longer trying to escape from those, you will be doing that child a tremendous service and setting them up for incredible future success. So I believe that this hour was worth it if you paid attention and understood, which I'm assuming you did. Thank you for listening and for learning, for your work with kids. And in future videos, we will get into other issues of how to work with difficult behavior in much more in-depth ways than what we discussed today. Today was just like kind of more of like minor behavioral issues in terms of escape behavior, but of course there can be a lot of other misbehavior that we have to deal with, and we'll talk about the appropriate and scientifically proven ways to handle those types of misbehavior so that you actually can increase your relationship and trust with these kids. Yes, believe it or not, you can increase trust with a child based on the way you handle misbehavior. So it doesn't have to be that you punish them terribly and they don't like you and now they're not going to listen to you again. You can increase the trust and the relationship and even the bond between you and a child significantly if you go about addressing misbehavior in the right ways, in scientifically proven ways, And so that's what we're going to be talking about in future videos. So if that sounds interesting to you, then stay tuned, and goodbye for now.